The alien marketplace was loud and alive with colors, sounds, and smells from 100 different worlds. Merchants shouted their prices, strange animals growled from their cages, and lights from hovering signs flickered above the crowd. Yet, in the middle of all the movement, there was one spot people carefully avoided. A young alien woman sat alone against the cold wall, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her clothes were ragged, and her skin was covered in dirt and dark patches, as though no one had cared for her in years. Her hair was tangled, her face hidden behind it, but her wide eyes watched every passing figure with quiet fear. People glanced at her and then quickly turned away. Some whispered words in their own tongue, sharp and cruel. Others crossed the street entirely, as if even being near her might stain them. They called her untouchable, filthy, cursed. No one wanted to speak to her, and no one had dared touch her for as long as she could remember. She was an outcast, unwanted even among her own people. And then the human walked by. Elias was not special by galactic standards. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with messy brown hair and the tired look of a traveler who had crossed too many star systems on too little sleep. He wore the worn jacket of a spacer, patched and stained from years of work, and carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had survived more than one close call in deep space. He had come to the market only to pick up supplies for his freighter, but as he passed the crowd, his eyes landed on her. Where others turned away in disgust or fear, Elias simply stopped walking. For a long moment, he looked at the girl sitting there, and she looked back at him, frozen like a cornered animal. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The crowd around him grew uneasy. An elder alien hissed a warning. A merchant shook his head sharply. "Leave her," someone muttered in broken standard. "She is nothing." Elias did not listen. He took a step closer. The girl flinched, pulling back against the wall as if expecting a blow. Elias slowed his movements, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. His voice was low, steady, carrying the kind of patience that could cut through fear. "Hey," he said softly. "You look thirsty." He reached into his bag and pulled out a clear bottle of water. Condensation ran down its side in shining drops. To her, it must have looked like a treasure. The marketplace fell silent for a heartbeat. Every pair of eyes turned toward him, waiting, judging. The girl's hands trembled violently as she stared at the bottle. She had not been offered anything in years, not even a kind word. Her throat ached at the sight of the water, but her fear was stronger. She shook her head quickly, pressing herself tighter against the wall, as though afraid he was tricking her. But Elias did not pull the bottle away. He crouched down, lowering himself to her level, and gently placed the bottle on the ground in front of her. Then, without another word, he slid it forward until it touched her foot. The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others hissed in outrage. It was unthinkable. Offering water to the untouchable. The girl looked from the bottle to his face. His expression was calm, not mocking, not pitying, simply human. He gave her a small nod as if telling her the choice was hers. Slowly, shakily, her hand reached out. Her fingers brushed the bottle, then pulled back, terrified of what might happen. But nothing happened. Elias just waited, patient as stone. Finally, she gripped the bottle, her thin hands barely strong enough to lift it. She unscrewed the cap with effort and brought it to her lips. The first sip burned her throat with its purity. Tears welled in her eyes as she drank again and again, unable to stop herself. Water dripped down her chin, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The silence around them shattered with angry voices. "Human, stop!" one alien shouted. "She is cursed!" another cried. "You shame yourself touching her!" Elias rose to his feet, his eyes sweeping across the angry faces. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned back to the girl. "Come on," he said quietly, offering his hand. The girl froze, staring at his hand as if it were a miracle. No one had offered her touch since she was a child. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. Around her, the crowd hissed and muttered, their voices sharp and cruel. But Elias kept his hand steady, waiting. With trembling fingers, she reached out and placed her hand in his. The warmth shocked her. It was real, solid, human. For the first time in so long, she felt the weight of another person's hand on hers. Gasps of horror swept through the marketplace. But Elias didn't flinch. He pulled her gently to her feet, steadying her when her knees nearly gave out. His grip was firm, protective, and just like that, the untouchable was touched. The girl stood at his side, her eyes wide with disbelief, her heart racing. She didn't know who he was or why he had done it. But in that single moment, her life had changed. The human had seen her. The human had touched her. And for the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. The crowd followed them with angry eyes as Elias guided the girl away from the market. Whispers grew louder like buzzing insects in the air. Some voices spat curses, others spoke warnings, but none of it slowed him. His hand never left hers, firm but gentle, keeping her steady as she stumbled along beside him. Her thin legs trembled with every step, unaccustomed to standing, but she clung to his grip as if it were the only solid thing in the universe. When they turned into a quieter street, the noise of the marketplace faded, leaving only the echo of their footsteps. The girl's breath came fast, ragged, as though she had been running. Her wide eyes darted in every direction, expecting at any moment that someone would rush out to drag her back into the shadows where she had always been kept. Elias stopped near a cargo platform where his small freighter rested. The ship wasn't beautiful. Its hull was scratched, its paint fading, but to him it was home. He looked down at the girl who now stood frozen at the edge of the platform, staring at the vessel with fear. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe here." The girl shook her head quickly, her tangled hair swinging. Her lips moved, but no words came out, only a soft, broken sound. She glanced back the way they had come, eyes filled with panic, as if certain her people would appear and punish her for taking the human's hand. Elias lowered himself slightly, trying to meet her gaze. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice one used when speaking to someone frightened. "No one's going to hurt you," he told her. "Not while I'm here." Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Slowly, she raised her free hand and touched her own arm, the place where his hand had pulled her to her feet. It was as though she still couldn't believe it had happened. She whispered something in her own language, words he did not understand, and then looked at him with eyes filled with confusion. Elias gave her hand a small squeeze. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." He led her up the ramp into the ship. The air inside was cooler, carrying the faint metallic scent of old machinery and oil. Lights flickered on as they entered, revealing a narrow corridor lined with doors. The girl hesitated, pressing close to the wall, her bare feet quiet on the metal floor. Everything about the ship was strange to her, and she looked ready to run at any second. Elias kept his pace slow, giving her time to take in the surroundings. At last he stopped before a small cabin with a wash station. He tapped the controls, and a gentle stream of water began to flow into a basin. Steam curled upward, filling the air with warmth. The girl froze at the sight. Her eyes widened, and her body trembled as though she had never seen such a thing. Her people had never allowed her near water except to drink from the dirty troughs left outside the settlement. To see clear, warm water flowing freely was beyond anything she imagined. Elias stepped aside and gestured toward the basin. "It's for you," he said softly. "Go ahead." She shook her head in disbelief, clutching the bottle he had given her earlier as if afraid it might vanish. Then very slowly she reached out one hand toward the water. Her fingertips brushed the surface and she gasped at the warmth. Tears filled her eyes. She looked up at him as though seeking permission again. He nodded. With trembling hands, she dipped her palms into the water, scooping it over her face. Dust and dirt ran down in thin streams. She rubbed her arms, her skin pale beneath the layers of grime. Each motion revealed more of her true self, hidden for so long beneath neglect. Strange, faint markings began to show, soft, glowing patterns, beneath her skin, like starlight trapped inside her veins. She stared at them in wonder and fear, quickly pulling her hands away as if she had revealed something shameful. Elias stepped forward, his expression calm. "It's not filth," he said firmly. "It's beautiful." She looked at him in shock, then back at the markings that stretched across her arms. No one had ever spoken such words to her. For as long as she remembered, the markings had been the reason she was shunned. They called her cursed because of them. But the human didn't look afraid. He didn't recoil. He simply watched her with steady eyes that saw not a curse but something precious. The girl's shoulders shook. A small broken sound escaped her lips and tears streamed down her face. She sank to the floor, covering her markings with her hands, ashamed even in this moment. Elias knelt beside her, not touching, only offering his presence. "You don't have to hide anymore," he said gently. She looked up at him, her eyes full of doubt. Words trembled on her lips, though she didn't yet speak his language well. Finally, she whispered in halting, broken standard, "Why, you touch me?" Elias met her gaze without hesitation. "Because you deserve it." For a long time she stared at him, trying to understand. Her people had told her she deserved nothing, that she was less than nothing. But the human's voice carried no mockery, no pity, only truth. Something inside her shifted, fragile and uncertain, like the first spark of light after endless darkness. She reached out slowly and touched the basin again, this time with less fear. The water slid across her fingers, washing away the years of dust. Elias rose to his feet, giving her space but staying near enough that she could feel his presence. He didn't hurry her, didn't push her. He simply waited. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she was not untouchable after all. The hum of the ship filled the silence as the girl sat near the wash basin, staring at the water that had already begun to cool. Her hair clung damp to her face, and the markings on her arms faintly glimmered under the cabin lights. She rubbed them as if trying to hide them again, but no amount of scrubbing would make them vanish. They were part of her, and she hated them because of what they had cost her. Elias leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching quietly. He didn't move closer, giving her space, but he didn't look away either. His steady eyes held no fear. To him, she wasn't a curse. To him, she was simply someone in need of care. Finally, he spoke. "You haven't eaten in a long time, have you?" The girl looked up, startled, then quickly shook her head. Her stomach betrayed her with a low growl, and she pressed her hands against it, embarrassed. Elias gave a small smile and left the room for a moment. When he returned, he carried a small tray with bread and fruit, the kind of food that lasted long journeys. He placed it gently in front of her. At first, she didn't touch it. She stared at the food as if it were bait in a trap. Her people had never given her food without cruelty. But Elias simply sat across from her, pulling out his own piece of bread and took a bite. He chewed slowly, waiting. Her wide eyes studied him, searching for a trick. When nothing happened, she hesitantly reached for the fruit. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it, and when she bit into it, sweet juice ran down her chin. A small gasp escaped her lips. It was the first time in years she had tasted something fresh. She ate quickly after that, unable to stop herself. Elias did not interfere. He only watched with a quiet satisfaction, as though making sure she didn't choke. When she finally slowed, tears glistened in her eyes again. She whispered something in her language, words soft and broken, and then looked at him with a mix of gratitude and confusion. Elias nodded as if he understood. "You're safe here. That's all that matters." The girl hugged her knees, resting her chin against them. Her markings glowed faintly in the dim light, patterns curling like rivers across her arms and neck. She pulled her sleeves down, trying to hide them, but Elias shook his head. "You don't have to cover them," he said. She frowned, not understanding. Her lips formed shaky words in broken standard. "Not curse?" "Not a curse," Elias said firmly. "They're part of you, and they're remarkable." Her eyes widened. No one had ever spoken of her markings with anything but disgust. She didn't know how to respond. Slowly, her hand lifted as if to test his words, and she held her arm toward him. Her skin shimmered faintly under the light, pale and fragile, yet filled with strange beauty. Elias did not flinch. He reached forward and carefully touched her forearm, tracing the faint glowing lines with his calloused fingers. She stiffened at first, her breath catching, but then she realized his touch was not harsh. It was careful, almost reverent, as though he were handling something precious, you see, he said quietly. Not filth, just light. The girl's lips trembled. She had no words. For years she had been told she was untouchable, and here was a human speaking as if she was something worth protecting, something worth seeing. After a long silence, Elias asked softly, "What's your name?" The girl blinked. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her knees and shook her head slowly. "You don't have one?" Elias asked. Her silence was all the answer he needed. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. He thought for a long moment. Then quietly, he said, "You should have a name. Everyone deserves one." The girl looked up, confused. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever cared enough to think she was worthy of a name. Elias studied her for another moment, then spoke again. "Saris, that's what I'll call you. Saris." The sound of it hung in the air, strange and unfamiliar to her ears. She repeated it softly, uncertain. "Saris?" He smiled. "Yes, Saris. Your name." For a moment she stared at him, then lowered her head, clutching the word to herself like a fragile gift. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were not from fear or shame. A name meant she was no longer nothing. A name meant she was seen. She whispered it again, more certain this time. "Saris," Elias nodded. "That's you." She pressed her hands over her chest as though holding the word close to her heart. For the first time in her life, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with water or food. It was the warmth of belonging, the warmth of being recognized as more than filth. Elias rose and adjusted his jacket. "Get some rest," he said gently. "We'll talk more tomorrow." Saris nodded, though her eyes followed him as he left the room. When the door closed, she curled up on the small cot, whispering the name to herself again and again until sleep finally claimed her. In the darkness of the cabin, the faint glow of her markings shimmered like starlight, and for the first time in years she dreamed not of curses but of a future where she was no longer untouchable. The morning cycle of the station brought new noise outside, but inside the freighter the world was quiet. Saris stirred on the small cot, blinking at the dim lights above her. For the first time in her memory she had woken without the cold ground beneath her or the sharp sting of cruel voices in her ears. She sat up slowly, her thin fingers brushing the blanket Elias had left her. It felt heavy, warm, and strangely safe. Her eyes drifted to the mirror fixed to the wall. She hesitated, then stood and walked closer. The reflection startled her. For years she had only seen herself in dirty fragments of glass or pools of muddy water. Now, washed and fed, she looked almost like someone else. The markings on her skin glimmered faintly, not in shame but in quiet beauty. She touched her face, whispering softly, "Saris." The name still felt new, fragile, but it belonged to her. The cabin door hissed open and Elias stepped inside. He carried a small tray with another meal, bread, dried meat, and a cup of tea that gave off steam. "Morning," he said. His tone was casual, as if he had always spoken to her like this. He set the tray on the table and glanced at her. "How are you feeling?" Saris turned quickly, her hair falling across her face. She lowered her head and mumbled, "Better." "Your standard." Was broken, the words rough, but Elias nodded as if they were perfect. "That's good," he said. "Eat. You'll need your strength." She obeyed this time without hesitation, taking small bites as Elias watched. He leaned against the wall, sipping from his own cup, but his eyes were alert. He knew the station would not forget what had happened yesterday. His thoughts proved correct sooner than expected. The alarm of the ship buzzed faintly, signaling someone had come to the docking platform. Elias set down his cup, his body tensing. Saris froze, her hands gripping the food tightly. Her instincts screamed danger. Her people had come. Elias walked to the hatch and tapped the control panel. The door opened, revealing 3 tall figures standing on the platform. They were elders of Saris's kind, their robes clean and sharp, their faces marked with symbols of authority. Behind them, a few guards held shock staffs, the elders' eyes fixed on Elias with cold disdain. "You have something that does not belong to you, human," one of them said in a deep, harsh voice. "Bring the girl out." Saris shrank back into the corner, trembling. Elias glanced at her, then back at the elders. "She's not a thing to be returned," he said calmly. "She's a person." The elder's face twisted with anger. "She is cursed. She is untouchable. You defile yourself by bringing her into your ship. If you care for your own safety, hand her over now." Elias stepped forward, blocking the view inside. His jaw tightened. "No," a sharp hiss spread among the aliens. The guards shifted their weapons, but the elders raised their hands to still them. The leader's voice dropped lower, almost threatening. "Do you know what she is? Those markings on her body are a stain. Her bloodline was exiled for a reason. She is not meant to live among us. And if you keep her human, you invite our wrath." Behind him, Saris clutched her arms, shame burning in her chest. She wanted to curl into a ball and disappear. Every word the elder spoke was the same poison she had heard all her life. But Elias did not waver. He looked straight at the elder, his voice firm. "Her name is Saris," he said. The elder blinked in surprise. "What did you call her?" "Saris," Elias repeated louder this time. He glanced back at her, meeting her wide eyes. "She has a name now, and she's not yours to discard anymore." Gasps rose from the guards. The elders exchanged dark looks. To name the untouchable was unheard of, a violation of every law and tradition they held. The leader's voice shook with fury. "You dare name her? You, an outsider, give her what is forbidden?" Elias's eyes narrowed. "I don't care about your laws. I care about her." The words struck Saris like fire. She stared at him, stunned. For the first time, someone had not only defended her, but declared her worth aloud. The elders turned cold, their voices like ice. "You will regret this. No human ship can outrun our judgment. We will hunt you both until the curse is erased." Elias hit the door control, and the hatch slammed shut in their faces. The alarm cut off, leaving silence inside the ship. Sarah stood trembling, her breath ragged. He turned to her, his eyes softening. "They won't take you back," he said. "Not while I'm here." Sarah shook her head, whispering, "Danger. For you." "I've faced worse," Elias said, with a small shrug. He walked closer and crouched so their eyes met. "Listen, Saris. You don't belong in their shadows anymore. You belong with people who see you. Understand?" Her lips trembled, but she nodded slowly. His words wrapped around her like a shield, fragile but real. Elias rose and moved to the cockpit. "We'll leave soon. They'll come back with more, and I'd rather not be here when they do." Saris followed him hesitantly, standing in the doorway. She looked at the glowing markings on her arms, then at the human who had given her a name. For the first time, she did not feel cursed. She felt seen. And though fear still gripped her heart, she whispered her new name again under her breath, holding onto it like light in the darkness. The freighter lifted from the docking platform with a low roar, its thrusters shaking the metal floor beneath them. Saris clutched the side of the cockpit as the ship rose higher, her eyes wide with fear. She had never been inside a vessel like this before, never left the ground. Her people had always kept her far from anything that meant freedom. Now the stars opened before her like an endless ocean. Elias sat in the pilot's chair, hands steady on the controls. His eyes scanned the readouts as warning lights blinked on the console. The station's patrol ships had noticed their departure. He had known they would not let them go quietly. Behind them, the comm crackled with voices. Harsh words in Ceres. Language filled the cabin, angry and accusing. Ceres flinched at every sound, recognizing the tone of her elders. Though she could not understand all the words spoken in Standard, she understood the venom. They were calling her a curse. They were warning Elias that he would pay for what he had done. Elias switched the comm off with a sharp motion. The silence that followed was almost heavier than the noise. He turned his head slightly, glancing at Ceres. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her markings glowing faintly in distress. "They don't scare me," Elias said, his voice calm. "And they shouldn't scare you either." Ceres shook her head quickly. "They never stop," she whispered in broken Standard. Her throat ached with the effort of forming words. "Always hate, always curse." Elias studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "Then let them hate," he said. "It doesn't change who you are." She stared at him, confused. All her life, the words of her people had been the only truth she knew. To hear someone dismiss them so easily, it was like being told the sky was not real. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came out. The ship jolted as a warning alarm blared. Patrol ships were closing in. On the radar, small bright dots spread across the screen, surrounding them like predators. Elias tightened his grip. "On the controls." "Hold on," he muttered. The freighter surged forward, thrusters flaring. The station ships followed quickly, their sleek designs built for speed. Ceres pressed herself against the seat, gripping the harness as Elias weaved through the outer lanes of the station traffic. The lights of the city blurred behind them, fading as they pushed toward open space. The comm sparked again. This time it was in Standard, a voice sharp and commanding. "Human vessel, release the cursed one immediately. You are violating the quarantine order. If you resist, you will be destroyed." Elias let out a short laugh, humorless. "Quarantine? That's what you call throwing a girl into the dirt for years?" He shook his head. "Not happening." Ceres looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. "They... strong. You... only one ship." "Yeah," Elias said, his tone steady. "But one ship with a reason is more dangerous than a fleet without one." The words puzzled her, but something in his voice made her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something she had never felt before. Hope. The patrol ships closed in. Beams of light fired across the void, narrowly missing the freighter's hull. Ceres gasped, covering her ears against the thunder of impacts. But Elias stayed calm, his hands moving quickly, guiding the freighter through maneuvers that seemed impossible for such an old vessel. He dodged between bursts of fire, engines straining, shields sparking under pressure. "Come on, girl," he muttered to the ship, coaxing it like a living thing. "Hold together for me." Ceres peeked over her arms, watching him. His eyes were sharp, focused, his body steady even as danger surrounded them. She had never seen anyone face fear this way. For the first time, she realized the human was not just kind. He was strong in a way that frightened her and comforted her at the same time. The freighter suddenly dove, engines howling. Patrol ships overshot, scrambling to follow. Elias pulled them toward the outer rim, where the gravity wells were weaker. The stars seemed to stretch around them as they broke free from the station's grip. Behind them, the voices on the comm grew desperate. "Return her. She carries poison. She carries death." Ceres shook her head, her voice breaking. "Not poison. Not curse." She pressed her hands to her chest, as if the words themselves hurt. "Why they lie?" Elias didn't answer, right away. His eyes stayed on the stars, but his voice was heavy. "Because people fear what they don't understand, and fear makes them cruel." He looked at her then, his expression firm. "But you're not what they say you are, Ceres. Don't ever forget that." Her throat tightened. The name sounded stronger each time he spoke it. It felt real now, not borrowed. She whispered it to herself again, Ceres. The radar blinked. The patrol ships were falling behind. The freighter's engines roared as they pushed into open space, leaving the station far behind. Finally, the alarms quieted, and only the hum of the ship filled the cabin. Ceres slumped in her seat, exhausted. She turned her head slowly, watching Elias. He leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow, but there was a faint smile on his lips. "We're clear," he said softly. Ceres released a shaky breath. She didn't know where they were going or what danger still waited, but she knew one thing for certain. The human had not abandoned her. He had stood against her people, against their accusations, and chosen her. For the first time in her life, she was not alone. The stars stretched endlessly before them, bright pinpoints scattered across the black sea of space. Ceres sat by the wide viewing window, her knees drawn up, her eyes fixed on the lights outside. She had never seen the galaxy like this. Open, vast, free. For so long, her world had been a single dirty street, a corner where she was told to sit and hide. Now she was moving faster than she could ever imagine, carried away from the voices that called her cursed. Elias entered the cabin, quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. He set one beside her and took a seat on the other side of the bench. For a while, neither spoke. The hum of the engines and the quiet clink of metal against metal filled the silence. "You like the view?" Elias asked finally. Ceres turned her head, studying him. Her broken standard struggled to form words. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Never I see before." Elias nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Most people don't stop to look anymore. They're too busy rushing from one job to the next. But the stars, they remind you how small we are, and how much is out there waiting. Ceres sipped from her cup carefully, the warmth surprising her. She didn't understand everything he said, but his tone carried meaning she could feel. Something about the stars was more than just light to him. They were freedom. Her fingers traced the edge of her cup. "Where go now?" she asked softly. "Farther from them," Elias answered simply. "Your people won't give up easily. They'll send more ships, maybe even try to spread lies about you to others. But if we keep moving, they'll have a harder time finding us." The words should have frightened her, but instead Ceres felt a strange calm. For the first time, she wasn't the one hiding alone. She wasn't crouched in the dirt, waiting for punishment. She was beside someone who refused to abandon her. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "Why? Help me?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "Danger. For you. Easy. Leave me." Elias looked at her for a long moment. His eyes softened, but his voice was steady. "Because you didn't deserve what they did to you. Because you deserve more than shadows and shame. And because, once I saw you there, I couldn't just walk away." Ceres lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. She pressed her hand against her chest where her heart beat quickly and whispered, "Ceres." She repeated the name again, as if reminding herself it was real. "Yes," Elias said gently. "Ceres." The ship shuddered suddenly as an alarm blared. Elias stood quickly, moving to the console. His hands danced across the controls, and the screen lit with red. "They found us," he muttered. Ceres hurried to his side, gripping the edge of the seat as she looked at the radar. Several bright dots appeared behind them, pursuit ships. Her body trembled, fear rising like a storm. Elias gritted his teeth. "They're faster than I thought." He glanced at her, his expression sharp but calm. "Hold on." The freighter's engines roared as Elias pushed them to their limit. The ship lurched forward, streaking past clusters of stars. Behind them, the enemy ships followed, beams of light flashing through the darkness. Explosions lit up near the hull, shaking the vessel violently. Ceres gasped, her hands covering her ears, but Elias' voice cut through the chaos. "Stay with me, Ceres. Don't be afraid." She forced herself to look at him. His eyes were steady, focused, as though nothing could shake him. His calm became her anchor. She lowered her hands and gripped the seat instead. Forcing her breath, Too slow. Elias pulled the freighter into a dive, engines screaming. The stars tilted wildly as they plunged toward a dense asteroid field. The pursuit ships hesitated, but then followed. Elias smirked faintly. Let's see how good they are at flying. The freighter wove through jagged rocks, each turn so sharp Ceres thought the ship would tear apart. But Elias's hands were sure, guiding them through narrow gaps. Behind them, two of the pursuers crashed into the stone, explosions flashing silently in the void. Ceres's eyes widened. She had never seen such skill. Her heart pounded, but for once it was not only fear, it was awe. The remaining ships pressed closer. Elias bit his lip, scanning the radar. Come on, give me something. Then his eyes lit with an idea. He slammed the controls forward, guiding the freighter toward a massive asteroid that spun slowly through space. At the last second, he cut the engines, letting the ship drift silently into the asteroid's shadow. The freighter floated in darkness, hidden by the rock's mass. Ceres held her breath, afraid even the sound of her heartbeat would give them away. The enemy ship swept past, scanning, their lights flashing across the void. Then, one by one, they vanished into the distance, chasing phantoms. Silence returned. The ship hummed softly, steady once more. Elias leaned back in his chair, exhaling. That was close. Ceres sank onto the floor, her legs too weak to hold her. She looked at him with wide, shining eyes. You save me. Again. Elias gave a tired smile. That's what I do. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say more, but her words were clumsy. Instead, she pressed her hand to her chest again, whispering softly, Ceres, not alone. Elias looked at her, his expression softening. He didn't answer, but his silence was full of meaning. Outside the window, the stars shone brighter than ever, as if the galaxy itself had opened a path for them. For Ceres, it was more than escape. It was the first step into a life she had never believed could exist. For the first time, she belonged not to the whispers of curses, but to the stars themselves. The ship drifted quietly through the endless dark, far from the station and far from the hunters who wanted Ceres returned. Days passed, and the tension of escape slowly gave way to something softer. Ceres spent long hours near the viewing window, staring at the stars as though they were speaking to her. Sometimes she whispered to herself, repeating her new name. Other times she would simply sit, listening to the hum of the ship, comforted by the steady sound that meant Elias was still there. Elias kept himself busy repairing the freighter after the chase. The engines had overheated, the shields were strained, and the navigation system needed careful adjustments. He worked with quiet focus, but whenever he passed through the cabin, he noticed Ceres watching him. She tried to hide it, but her eyes always followed his movements with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. One evening, Elias brought her a small bundle. Inside was a simple shirt and trousers, worn but clean. These should fit, he said. Better than what you've been wearing. Ceres touched the fabric carefully as though afraid it might vanish if she pressed too hard. Her voice was soft. Mine? Yes, Elias replied with a nod. Yours. She clutched the clothes to her chest, her eyes filling with quiet warmth. No one had ever given her anything that was not meant to shame her or cast her aside. Now, something simple like clothing felt like proof she truly belonged. Later, when she appeared wearing them, Elias smiled faintly. The clothes were too big on her frame, but she stood straighter than before. He did not comment on the size, he only said, Looks good. Ceres lowered her head shyly, but the corners of her lips curved upward. As the ship traveled, Elias began, teaching her more words in standard. Each day he would point at objects, the console, the chair, the stars outside, and name them. Ceres repeated after him, stumbling at times, but her determination was unshaken. Her voice grew steadier with each attempt, and Elias often found himself impressed at how quickly she learned. One night, when the stars glowed like silver fire across the window, Ceres turned to Elias. She placed her hand on her chest and said, Clearly, Ceres. Then she pointed at him. Elias. Her eyes glimmered as though she had accomplished something monumental. Elias chuckled softly. "That's right. Saris and Elias," she whispered again, almost like a secret she wanted to protect. Though the days were filled with quiet moments, shadows of the past still lingered. Sometimes Saris would wake from restless dreams, her body shaking as though she expected cruel hands to strike her. When Elias heard her cries, he never forced her to explain. He only sat nearby until her breathing slowed, reminding her she was no longer alone. She began to find comfort not only in his presence but also in the way he treated her, without fear, without disgust, without pity. For her entire life, touch had been something denied to her. Now, when Elias handed her a cup or guided her gently through a narrow corridor, she felt her chest tighten with something she could not name. One quiet morning, Saris stood at the window, her fingers pressed against the glass. She watched a distant world spin below, green and blue and full of light. Elias joined her, arms folded across his chest. "We could land there for supplies," he said. "It's a trade world, safer than most." Saris nodded slowly, but then asked in her careful standard, "If people there see me, what happen?" Elias looked at her seriously. "Then they'll see you. Not as your people called you, but as Saris, and if anyone dares to say otherwise, they'll have to deal with me." She blinked at him, her eyes wide. No one had ever spoken for her before. Her throat tightened and she whispered, "Saris, not alone." Elias gave a small smile. "Never again." They landed briefly on the trade world. For the first time, Saris walked among crowds without hearing curses thrown at her. Some looked at her markings with curiosity, some with confusion, but no one dared push her aside. With Elias walking beside her, she felt strong, as if his presence wrapped around her like a shield. She even managed to speak a few words to a merchant, her voice shaky but proud. That night, back aboard the ship, she sat with Elias in the quiet cabin. Her heart was heavy with thoughts she struggled to express. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Elias, why always close?" He leaned back in his chair, considering her question. "Because you matter, because you're worth standing beside, and because I want you close, Saris. That's all." Her eyes filled, though she tried to hold the tears back. Slowly, she reached out, her hand hovering uncertainly in the air. Elias noticed and met her hand with his own, steady and warm. Their fingers touched gently. For Saris, that single touch was more powerful than all the stars she had seen. She whispered, his name again, softly, as though it was the most precious word in the universe. Elias only gave her a reassuring nod, his hand still holding hers. The freighter continued on its path, carrying them deeper into the unknown. But Saris no longer feared the journey. The galaxy had once told her she was filthy, untouchable, unwanted. But the human had washed her, given her a name, and kept her close. Now, as she sat with him watching the stars race past, she finally believed what she had never dared before. She belonged. And this was only the beginning.